everybody. We're going to do part 3, soil problems. And big problems with soil is soil erosion. And this is a really big problem because, as you guys know, all of these nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium come from the soil. And then those nutrients are dissolved in water, and then plants can take them up. So your soil erosion is caused primarily by water and by wind, all right? And this is accelerated by poor soil management practices. So soil erosion is a huge issue in most places in the world, and it's because of the way that we actually farm the land. Right? So soil is eroding a lot faster than it's actually forming in about a third of the world's cropland. So one of the big issues that we have is salinization, which is the soil becoming too salty. And here you can see the steps of salinization right over here. Irrigation water contains small amounts of dissolved salts, especially in the Midwest where this irrigation water is being pumped up from groundwater. There are a lot of minerals in it, and there's a higher salt content. It's not like the ocean or anything, but you have a lot of minerals that actually impede the absorption of nutrients as well. So what you have is evaporation and transpiration leave the salts behind, especially if you have a lot of water that you are watering your crops with, and in the heat of the day, the water evaporates, but the salts and the minerals get left behind, and they can almost form a white crust on the soil. And that's your salinization. And as it rains, or as it waters more, that salt then goes down and it gets to the roots of the soil of the plants, and plants can't grow in salt water. Okay, they need fresh water. Waterlogging is when the water table rises. So a lot of times you have either over irrigation or you have too much water that falls, and it's not necessarily at flood, but what happens is you get this water table rising up towards the surface, and the roots are going down in that area. And like we discussed in class, if you take a plant that's growing in your house and you take it out of its soil and you put it in water like a vase, it will die because it needs that air. So here's your soil salinization. This typically happens in arid and semi-arid areas where the small amount of precipitation that falls, it's quickly evaporated and it leaves those salts behind. And then you have desertification. So desertification is exactly what it sounds like. The land becomes a desert. Typically, this is human-induced. And what happens is when you cut down a bunch of trees in that area, like if we were saying with rainforests, you can't just create a rainforest. If you cut down a bunch of trees and plant other trees, you're not creating that ecosystem, that small ecosystem that used to be in that specific region, right? And so when you cut down a bunch of trees and you just replace them with saplings or even some bigger trees, you're missing all of those ecological relationships and the different layers and the different of rainforests especially. So when you cut down trees, what happens is you don't have all of that moisture in the atmosphere that then will fall as rain when it gets a little bit cooler in the evening. And you also don't have these trees sucking water up out of the ground and having it go out. You don't have a lot of the shade. And what happens is that this, whatever vegetation it is that's on top of it, whether it's overgrazing or just cutting out the shade, you get that change in climate and you get desertification happening, meaning that it's just that soil dries up and there isn't a real way to restore it. Okay. So the American Dust Bowl, this happened from 1930 to 1937. And the Great Plains already, they're very subject to drought and they have little precipitation. And in 1930 to 1937, there was a severe drought in this area. Here's the thing is that what we had done is we had taken the native vegetation and we had replaced it with whatever crops it was that we wanted. And they were annual crops. And then when they were gone, we just kind of a lot of times tilled the soil in to get the nutrients in it, but then you left the soil bare. You didn't plant a cover crop. There weren't roots to hold anything in place. And what happened was, if you have dirt and you let it dry out, that dirt becomes dust. Okay, you don't have that soil to hold those particles together. And you guys know our prevailing winds in the US go from west to east. So what happens was, you had these winds and they blew soil as far east as New York City and DC. And a lot of farmers went bankrupt during this. What this is this is either in Arizona or New Mexico. This is an oil rig, and it's a, I forget what the name is, but it's a dust storm. And it's because the winds are blowing over a very arid, semi-arid area. And what happens is they have sirens that'll go off, and you got to get inside, whether it's inside your car, inside the rig, whatever it is. And it starts. So here, just, it's like that leading edge of a thunderstorm sometimes. And this is the same exact spot. There we go. So that's the rig in the middle of the day during this dust storm, which is just absolutely crazy. So you see now, this is from a friend of mine whose husband works on rigs. So now he's inside of his truck because you can't be outside during this. So what do we do about it? Well, we have soil conservation practices, especially in farming. So we have 6 that we're going to take a look at: contour plowing, windbreaks, perennial crops, terracing, no-till agriculture, and strip cropping. You guys do need to know the general idea of what each of these are. So contour plowing is when you plow around a hill, but you follow the natural contour of land. So the water is going to naturally run down, but here, if it runs down, so it's going to fall everywhere, but it runs down, and what happens is it gets, the soil from here gets stuck in this layer. The soil from here gets stuck in this layer. The soil from here gets stuck in this layer. So there are 6 or 7 steps that the soil, you're going to have some runoff because you're in a hilly area. But what's going to happen is that soil, instead of just washing completely away, it's going to get kind of stuck on different contours and different areas that you're farming, which is better than it just going away. Okay, windbreaks, sometimes called agroforestry, agriculture and forestry together. Basically, your trees and your crops are planted together to improve your soil fertility in degraded soils. Trees grow much longer. They provide a lot of soil benefits. So they reduce the soil erosion. They regulate water. They provide habitat for natural enemies like birds, of crop pests. And the leaf litter regenerates the soil. That's why New Jersey has such amazing soil, is because every single year in fall, all the leaves fall. They decompose and they put all of these amazing nutrients back into the soil, right? We're going to take a look at windbreaks, also shelter belts for mitigation purposes. Yeah, I put it later. So perennial crops is just a fancy way of saying cover crops. So they're crops that you don't need to plant year after year. They kind of come up. Vetch, rye, and clover are examples. Clover they use because it naturally, they have nitrogen fixing bacteria on the roots. Clover is a legume. And so in that year that the crop is lying fallow, that field is fallow, you don't use it because you're kind of letting it regenerate. A lot of times they'll plant a cover crop on it, like clover. So these easy to grow plants, they send out nets of roots. They help hold topsoil in place. If you've ever tried to pull out grass and weeds and stuff like that, these roots go crazy, and they really, really hold the soil in place. All right, terracing. This is creating terraces on steep slopes to prevent erosion. This is actually rice farming. I think this is Vietnam. And they flood the fields. I'm not exactly sure how from the top. It's crazy. But what happens is this soil doesn't erode, okay, because it is caught. And this is all man-made. Nothing like this is natural. No-till agriculture. So the residue from previous year's crops are left in place to prevent soil erosion. So if you see here, I don't know what crop this was that they planted, but they harvested it and they left it there. And then in between, they planted this crop. And then what's going to happen is that when this crop, they harvest it, they're going to cut it down. And by that point in time, this will be decomposed into the soil. All right. Strip cropping is basically what you saw in contour farming. That was contour farming and strip cropping. This is just alternating strips of different crops. Doing it along the natural contour is contour farming. Okay. Strip cropping is just the 2 of them. Sometimes we call that polyculture. Poly from the Greek word poly, meaning many. You're planting different crops in with each other. And sometimes you can do that. Like you should plant basil around your tomatoes, not just because eating basil and tomatoes is delicious, but because they fend off natural pests. Same thing with, there's a whole book called Roses Love Garlic, and it's all about interplanting. If you plant garlic around your roses, they won't get mites or aphids or whatever it is that they're prone to get. All right, so different strategies to improve soil fertility: crop rotation, the addition of green manure or limestone. Okay, so what are the nutrients that you're trying to get into it? So you're going to try to do that naturally. All right, so crop rotation is just planting a series of different crops in the same field over a period of years, so that you're not planting like corn, 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 and then all of the nutrients that corn needs over and over again you have to put back in. It lets the nutrients specifically for certain plants naturally replenish, and then it lessens the pests and insect disease. Every single year I rotate where my zucchini is, because every single year I get stem borers. I hate stem borers. Like the so anyway, I changed the location, like really changed the location, so that if there were any eggs around that area, they have to really work hard to get to where I planted the zucchini the following year. All right, so with soil reclamation, you need to stabilize the land to prevent further erosion, and then you need to restore the soil. This, what you're looking at, are shelter belts. Okay, these sometimes called windbreaks, but these are very, very specific. They're rows of trees planted to reduce wind erosion of soil. And this is what they did after the Dust Bowl. You had this whole big campaign to replant native plants that have insane root systems versus whatever it is that we're planting. Let's say their root system is like this, just because I want to be able to show you guys. The native plants, you can have their root systems grow, like 25 feet. I need to find a comparison picture for you guys. But during the Dust Bowl, the Civilian Conservation Corps planted shelter belts. They went out and they planted rows and rows and rows and rows of trees to prevent further soil erosion. And that's it. Your homework for tonight is to do the part 2 of the study guide. It's a separate study guide that is posted. It's on part 3. I did part 1 on sections 1 and 2. I screwed up. I'm just calling this part 2 study guide. Okay, so that's your homework for tonight.